For me, the number one example of a failed parent in the Bible is Rebecca. Well, I know this is an unpopular opinion in Christendom, but it's for me, it is Rebecca. In the book of Genesis, chapter 27, verse 1 to 40, you will discover that Rebecca orchestrated the destiny exchange as well as the failure of her own child, Esau. In Genesis 25, verse 21 to 28, she was actually barren. Isaac had to pray. She got pregnant. Bless God. She got pregnant. She had twins in her womb. These twins struggled, she, to the extent she became so worried and had to go and inquire of the Lord that why are these twins, struggling in my womb like this? So she got an answer that favored, one child over another. She was supposed to go back and pray again, possibly ask for mercy, even ask for mercy on behalf of the other child, who was even disfavored. But no, she didn't do that. She chose the way of favoritism. She chose to favor and like Jacob over Esau. If she were a good mother, she would have prayed for mercy rather than neglecting him and shifting all her love and attention to the other child, Jacob, whom she felt had better prospects. Now, this leads us to the issue of fairness in a lot of homes. A lot of parents are not fair. They choose, one child that is succeeding over the other child whom they feel is not doing well, or one child who they feel has good prospects to another child who they feel, this one, nothing can come out of him. So, I've seen many parents do this a lot. In other words, Rebecca killed Esau while he was still alive. Because if you take somebody's destiny away from him, what's left of the person? No wonder she said in the book of Genesis that she didn't that she didn't want to be bereaved of both of them in one day. So she knew that she had killed Esau while Esau was still alive. So Rebecca influenced what God wanted to do. Rebecca shouldn't have become a stumbling block to her own child, her own first child at that. Even today, some parents are still guilty of this destiny exchange. They exchange the destinies and glories of their children because they do not care. Well, Rebecca died even before Jacob could return from Padan Aram. Of course, when Esau was threatening to kill Jacob, she helped Jacob escape to her brother's place, Laban, and all that. Before Jacob could return, she had already died. Now, in another verse, I think Genesis 27, I think verse 46, she complained of her life being weary. Now, why won't her life be weary? Her life would definitely be weary because Esau, of course, wasn't behaving normally any longer, marrying wives from, places where he shouldn't have married, taking wives from and all that. He wasn't really behaving normally anymore. Of course, what do you expect from someone whose destiny has been taken away from him? Yeah. So Esau was misbehaving, and not only that, she was saying she didn't want to lose, the both of them in one day. She didn't want to be bereaved of both of them in one day. So she knew that she had killed Esau already. That's an example of a bad mother as far as I am concerned. Rebecca, she could have been a good wife, a good partner and all that, but as a mother, I think she failed terribly as a mother. So Rebecca stood in the way of Isaac, blessing Esau. No, she shouldn't have done that at all. She would have allowed him to be blessed. She stood in the way of him receiving his blessings from his father, instead diverting the blessings to Jacob. Now, that was very bad of her. For me, she's the number one. In fact, biblically, she's the number one example of a failed and a bad parent / mother. Now, the number two example of a failed parent in the Bible, for me, is King Hezekiah. Yes, the King Hezekiah. When the prophet Isaiah told King Hezekiah in the book of Isaiah that he was going to die, he immediately started praying for himself. But when he was told that his sons / descendants will be taken into slavery and become eunuchs, His response was so nonchalant and selfish. He never prayed. Now, in the book of, Isaiah chapter 39, verse 8, Hezekiah's response to Isaiah was, "Good is the word of the Lord, which you have spoken." Good is the word of the Lord. For he said, "At least there will be peace and truth in my days." You know, let me just read this. Let me read this. Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "The word of the Lord which you have spoken is good." For he said, "At least there will be peace and truth in my days." So long as there will be peace and truth in his own days, he doesn't care what happens in the days of those coming after him. He doesn't care what happens to the children coming after him, his descendants. Now, this is the reason why many parents jeopardize their children's lives and destinies, using children for money rituals, turning children, to domestic and even sex slaves, because these parents do not care about their lineage. They don't care about their descendants. All they care about is now, and themselves. It is even another reason why many parents do not even bother to leave inheritances for their children or descendants. Matter of fact, many pastors and ministers tend to be nice and kind to other people outside while even neglecting their own children, who should be their topmost priority. I think this is hypocrisy when you neglect your own children and you're blessing and pouring into others outside just so you can earn the praises of men. I don't think it's acceptable as far as I'm concerned. It's not acceptable. And Hezekiah didn't care about his descendants. He didn't care about whatever happened to them. He didn't even care about their well-being, and all he cared about was himself. So long as there will be peace and truth in my days, I don't care. That was exactly his response. It was all about selfishness, self-centeredness, for King Hezekiah. He could have been a good leader. He could have been a good, husband to his wife or wives, but as a father, as a parent, King Hezekiah failed. And you can even see that in the life of Manasseh, his son. His son was not well trained. He wasn't even walking in the way of the Lord like Hezekiah had walked. Well, that's we are not really going into deeply into that, but it's reflected in the son that the father failed terribly, in that aspect of fatherhood. This leads us to the next example of a failed parent in the Bible, which is Eli. Eli, yes. Eli was a priest in Israel. He dished out the law and its consequences, to the people, except his own children. Although the Bible recorded that he corrected his children verbally, but he never disciplined them. He didn't discipline them, and it wasn't recorded that he even prayed for them. So he condoned their misbehaviors and didn't hold them accountable for their wrongdoings. Eli didn't train his children in the way and fear of the Lord, even as a priest. Pastors today, they are the priests of our time. Many pastors today do not train their children in the way and fear of the Lord. They are too busy. Many of them are even too busy with the work of God than for the children, God's heritage in their care. Now, Eli's children were so ill-mannered to the extent that they dishonored God's sacrifices. They slept with the women of the temple. And Eli only, just verbally corrected them. He wasn't firm in the correction. He didn't discipline them. He didn't dish out consequences for their actions. And this led to Eli incurring God's wrath, such that both Eli and his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, the three of them all died in one day. Another person, who was a failed parent, a failed mother in the Bible, was Herodias, the wife of Herod. She manipulated her daughter into asking for the head of John the Baptist in the book of Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 to 12. Many mothers are guilty of this. They hate some ministers of God to the extent they don't even mind gossiping them with their children, ripping them apart with their mouths, just, to register that hatred, to ensure that they pass that particular hatred they have for that man of God, to their children. Herodias actually passed the hatred she had for John the Baptist, who was warning, Herod not to marry her because she happened to be the wife of, Herod's brother Philip. So she hated John the Baptist for speaking the truth. She didn't want to hear that. So she had, such intense hatred for John the Baptist to the extent she manipulated, her daughter, to ask for his head on a platter. As mothers, as parents, I don't think we should pass hatred down to the next generation, no matter what. Let's try, to, to create peace. Don't let your children inherit your enemies. At this point, I think we need wisdom. We need wisdom. Of course, you want your children to be careful around some persons and all that. May God give us wisdom in Jesus' name. Another example of a bad parent recorded in the Bible are the cannibal mothers. They both had an agreement to eat their children, even though one proved smarter than the other. They both ate, the other one's child together. In fact, they are very, very bad examples of who mothers should be. Just because of, a famine that was temporary. These are parents that could sacrifice their children just because of, passing trials and tribulations. They are passing. They will definitely overcome them. Famine comes and goes. Do you have to sacrifice? Do you have to eat your own child? In our days today, parents may not directly eat their own children, but there are parents who would sacrifice their children, subject their children to the harshest conditions just because they want to enjoy today. They want to eat it all today. They want to enjoy their lives. They don't mind what these children are subjected to, the pains, just for their own gains. Another example of a failed parent in the Bible was Samuel. Well, this could be a bit surprising and unpopular too. Samuel failed as a parent, although he was a good priest. He excelled. In fact, he scored 100% as a priest and a judge of Israel throughout his lifetime, but he failed as a parent. His children, Joel and Abijah, didn't walk in his ways, and this led to Israel demanding for a king. You read more about this in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 1 to 6. In verse 3, to be precise, you read more about the deeds of the sons of Samuel, where his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gains, took bribes, and perverted justice. Although their father had made his children, Joel and Abijah, judges of Israel at the time, they were rejected by the children of Israel due to their ill behaviors. As a Christian and ministers of God, as parents, we should not be too busy for God, than the children he has given us. We should be more focused on raising godly children. Another example of a bad or a failed parent in the Bible was Lot. Lot offered his daughters to a mob to be sexually assaulted by them. I can't even imagine. I can't imagine how those daughters of his would have felt, seeing their father willing to offer them to strangers, to mobs, to be raped by them. If not that those angels had stepped in then to save the situation, to save the day. I wonder how those girls would have felt about their father forever. Not only that, he later had sex with his daughters, which led to the birth of, Moab and Ammon, which later became nations. Although this happened in his drunken state, it doesn't still excuse him from being a bad parent. You can read more about the story of Lot in the book of Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 to 28. Another example of a failed parent in the Bible was Athaliah. Athaliah was a power-drunk grandmother who usurped the throne after her son, King Ahaziah, was killed. Remember, she was also a queen of Judah before, and she also came to also rule in Israel after her son, King Ahaziah, was killed. She was the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel. She ruthlessly killed all her grandchildren, except for Joash, who was hidden in the temple by his aunt Jehoshaphat or Jehoshabeth, and the high priest Jehoiada, who was also Jehoshaphat's husband. Athaliah ruled for 6 years until priest Jehoiada orchestrated a coup. That's the priest Jehoiada orchestrated a coup which led to Athaliah being executed, and Joash was enthroned as king at the age of 7. Athaliah ruled wickedly and promoted, idol worshipping. She was a very, very bad example of a mother as well as a grandmother. You can read about Athaliah in the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 10 till the end. An example of a failed parent in the Bible was King Ahaz. In the book of 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 3, he was a king in Judah who sacrificed his son to idols. Of course, he also led the people into idolatry, but he sacrificed his son to idols. Very bad example of a parent, King Ahaz. Another example of a bad parent was Manasseh. Manasseh, you remember we had talked about his father already. That's King Hezekiah. Now the son too, Manasseh, his father failed to train him. He also failed also too, as a parent too, as a human, as a king in Judah. He was a king in Judah who engaged also in idolatry and also sacrificed his own son. You can see how the failure of a father can affect his son, and how he also failed his own sons too. The failure of Hezekiah led to the wastage of 2 generations after him. You can read more about Manasseh in the book of 1 Kings chapter 21. As parents, this is not to scold you at all. As a matter of fact, as a parent, you are actually doing well. I want to believe that we are all doing well as parents. We are putting in our best. This is just to admonish us and to remind us constantly to be intentional parents. So please like, share, and subscribe. I really, really do covet your subscription. Please, it is highly appreciated. Thank you.